In my past life, my parents drilled their expectations into me, molding me into the perfect bargaining chip for their social ambitions. I ended up marrying a stranger, nothing more than a tool in their quest for power and status. My husband? He wasted no time chasing after younger women, flaunting his affairs while I was left to deal with the mess. He infected me with diseases from his escapades, treated me like a servant, and pushed me into the darkest corners of depression until I could barely recognize myself. The day I fell, I thought that was the end. But the cruelest twist? The one who came to collect my broken body wasn't my husband. There wasn't anyone who had been part of my miserable life. It was him, the man I had secretly loved when I was younger, the one I thought I'd lost forever. But fate has given me a second chance. When I opened my eyes again, I was back at my engagement party, standing at the threshold of a future I now had the power to rewrite. This time, I won't let anyone use me. I'm no one's pawn anymore. Chapter 1: Rebirth. When I came to, soft music was playing in the background. I blinked, feeling disoriented, as the room around me slowly came into focus. It took a moment for my brain to catch up, but then it hit me this was all too familiar. I had been reborn. And not just anywhere, right back to the day of my engagement to Nathan. A jewelry box sat on the table in front of me, and my mother's voice drifted from beside me. "This is a gift from Nathan. Put it on, and from now on, you'll be Nathan's fiancée." I didn't need to open the box to know what was inside. A diamond ring, 1 carat, basic, uninspired. Nathan hadn't even bothered to pick it out himself, his secretary had handled the whole thing. I glanced around the table. Nathan, as always, was absorbed in his meal, and the others wore satisfied smiles as if everything was going exactly according to plan. To them, I was just a well-wrapped package, something to be handed off, traded, and sealed with a bow. No one had ever asked what I wanted. No one cared. But this time, things were going to be different. I wasn't going to be a pawn in the Taylor family's power games anymore. Just because I was born a girl didn't mean I had to spend my life as someone else's bargaining chip. My brother and I were both human beings. Why did I have to be the one to sacrifice everything? I rose from my seat abruptly. "I'm not marrying Nathan." The smile on my mother's face froze for a moment before she recovered, her voice dropping a few degrees. "Sit down, Rosalie." Everyone else kept chatting and laughing as if I hadn't said a word. My mother grabbed my arm, her voice low but sharp. "Sit down. Don't make a scene." I shook her hand off and spoke louder, clearer this time. "I said I'm not marrying Nathan." The slap came fast and hard, my mother's palm cracking across my cheek. "Rosalie, have you lost your mind?" she snapped. "You should be grateful the Miller family even considered you. What makes you think you have the right to refuse? You'll marry him whether you want to or not." My hands curled into fists, my nails digging into my palms, but I barely felt the pain. I met her gaze, my voice steady, though my whole body trembled with anger. All my life, she's used family to control me, to force me to live the way I wanted. But what about me? Has she ever cared about what I wanted? The only person she's ever truly loved is her precious son, Ryan Taylor. My voice shook, but my resolve was firm. "If you love Nathan so much, why don't you divorce Dad and marry him yourself?" Her face drained of color. "What on earth are you talking about? Have you gone completely mad?" My father, ever the stern figurehead, narrowed his eyes at me, his tone sharp and commanding. "Apologize. Now." I let out a bitter laugh. And then, with a surge of strength I didn't even know I had, I flipped the entire table over, sending plates, glasses, and food crashing to the floor. "Rosalie! Rosalie! You little..." The room exploded into chaos. My father lunged forward, ready to strike me, while Nathan's father tried to calm him down. I stood there, arms crossed, watching with a cold smile. I was done with this family, and nothing was going to stop me from walking out. The noise had drawn the attention of the restaurant manager, who rushed in, and with him came another man, one of the hotel's shareholders. Liam Jones. I turned and saw him. That familiar face, handsome and composed. My heart tightened in my chest, and before I could stop myself, I ran toward him, throwing myself into his arms. In my previous life, I had longed for him and yearned for him in ways I could never express. But now, holding him, feeling the warmth of his body against mine, it felt so real, so solid. Rosalie? Liam stammered, clearly taken aback. We hadn't been this close in years, and his confusion was obvious. I buried my face in his chest, my voice barely above a whisper but filled with desperation. Liam, please, take me away from here. Chapter 2: The Past Life. Liam and I grew up in the same neighborhood. We were practically inseparable from the start. Even in preschool, he was always there, standing up for me and protecting me like some kind of childhood hero. We were the definition of childhood sweethearts, and over the years, those innocent feelings deepened into something more. But my parents saw things differently. My mother was especially adamant. Stay away from Liam. She'd say. He's beneath you. He'll never be good enough for a tailor. Whenever she caught us together, she'd lash out at me, sometimes with harsh words, other times with her hand. Eventually, my back was covered in scars from the countless beatings. When the punishments didn't work, she switched tactics. If you keep seeing him, she warned one day, her eyes cold and unyielding, we will destroy the Jones family. Your father and I have the power to make sure he disappears from this world. Do you understand? I was terrified. So I did what she wanted. I cut Liam out of my life. I started avoiding him at every opportunity. I picked a major in school I knew he wouldn't like, and my parents arranged for a driver to pick me up and drop me off just to make sure I didn't run into him. One day, he cornered me outside the classroom, his face filled with confusion and hurt. Rosalie, he asked. What did I do wrong? Why are you avoiding me? I forced myself to meet his gaze. You didn't do anything wrong. After that, our paths diverged completely. I ended up at an all-girls college while Liam got into Oxford on a scholarship. He went off to chase his dreams, and I stayed behind, trapped in the Taylor family's rigid expectations, waiting for the day when I'd fulfill my duty. I still couldn't stop thinking about him. No matter how hard I tried, he was always there, lingering in the back of my mind. After graduation, Liam started a business. Word was he worked tirelessly, throwing himself into his work. Meanwhile, I followed my parents' plan to the letter, meeting Nathan, the young master of the Miller family. We had a few awkward dates, got engaged, and then married, and before I knew it, I had settled into the life they'd chosen for me: a wife, a mother, and most importantly, a pawn. Because of me, the Taylor family gained influence, and their business grew by leaps and bounds. My parents often praised me, saying I had brought them wealth and connections they could never have dreamed of. By the time my brother was ready to take over, the Taylor name was firmly planted among the city's elite. But no one ever asked me if I was happy. After the wedding, Nathan's true self emerged. He spent his nights with younger women, openly flaunting his affairs. He even brought one of them home while I was still recovering from childbirth. He infected me with diseases, cut me off from my friends, and turned me into nothing more than a live and maid for his family. The emotional abuse was constant and relentless until I was drowning in depression with no way out. I begged my parents and my brother for help, but they brushed me off. You married into the Miller family, they said. You're their responsibility now. Stop being so dramatic. You have everything you could want. My mother even called to warn me. Don't cause trouble with Nathan. If you mess up our relationship with the Miller family, I'll make sure you regret it. I remember standing on the rooftop that day, tears streaming down my face, my hair tangled, and my clothes a mess. I felt completely broken, utterly alone. And then I jumped. I was gone. But my soul didn't leave, not right away. I hovered over my broken body, watching as people screamed, called the police, and rushed to help. The first person to arrive wasn't Nathan. It wasn't my family either. It was Liam. My body was completely shattered, barely recognizable, but Liam knelt beside me, his face calm but distant, as if he had prepared himself for this moment. He handled everything, calling the authorities and informing my family. Just as they were about to zip up the body bag, Liam stepped forward and gently touched what was left of my face. A single tear fell, landing on my brow. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have been here sooner." I thought that was the end. But over the next few years, Liam changed. He became ruthless, expanding his business empire without mercy. 5 years later, both the Taylor and Miller families were in ruins, crushed by Liam's relentless drive. The Jones family stood alone, unrivaled. Even then, he didn't stop. He went after my family, after Nathan, driving them to ruin, leaving them no option but to resort to desperate measures that ultimately landed them in jail. Once his revenge was complete, Liam seemed to age overnight. He never remarried. Instead, he left everything he had to my daughter. And one quiet morning, he passed away. I felt his spirit slip away beside my gravestone as if he had been waiting all those years just to be near me again. And now, I'm standing in front of him once more. I've been given a second chance. This time, I'm not running away. This time, I'm asking him to take me with him. Chapter 3, Wanting You. When he heard me say those words, his entire expression softened, and a bright, unmistakable light filled his eyes. He nodded, firm and resolute. "Let's go." Without a second glance at the chaos we left behind, I followed Liam out of the room. My parents' angry shouts echoed behind me, but I didn't care. Some parents are born to collect debts from their children. In my last life, I paid mine in full. In this one, I'm breaking free, and even if my future is covered in snow and ice, I won't regret it for a second. Some parents expect a lot from their children. In my past life, I fulfilled all those expectations. In this life, I'm choosing my own path. Even if it's tough, I will have no regrets. I followed Liam all the way to his car. He started the engine but didn't pull away immediately. Instead, he shot me a playful grin. "The Taylor family's perfect little angel, since when did you learn to stand up to your parents?" I turned to look at him. His hand was warm in mine, his presence so real, so alive. But as I thought of the future, how he'd fight both the Taylor and Miller families for me, how he'd end up alone because of it, a lump rose in my throat, and I could feel my eyes sting. Liam noticed and frowned, concerned. "What's wrong?" I swallowed hard, and then whispered. "I don't have anywhere to go now. Can I stay with you?" He blinked, his Adam's apple bobbing as he processed my words. His gaze darkened, his voice steady but low. "Rosalie, do you understand what you're asking?" I nodded and met his eyes, my voice unwavering. "I do. Please, let me stay with you." In my past life, he spent decades by my graveside, mourning me. Just thinking about it made my throat tighten. But now that I had this chance, I didn't regret asking for his help. Because if anyone was worth fighting for, it was him. His grip tightened around my hand, his warmth seeping into my skin. His voice, though quiet, was full of resolve. "All right," he said. "Come home with me." Followed him to his place. Liam had been living on his own for years, long since cut off from the Jones family's influence. He'd built a life for himself in the city, and he had earned a reputation for his hard work and success. His home was simple but comfortable, a 3-bedroom house. He told me to pick any room I wanted, assuring me that everything I needed would be brought over by tomorrow. As I wandered through the house, my eyes landed on something unexpected sitting on a shelf, a Barbie doll. It was cute, delicate, and completely out of place in the otherwise minimalist room. I recognized it immediately. It was a gift I'd given him when we were 5. Liam had given me a small wooden horse in return, a keepsake that meant the world to me. But that wooden horse didn't last long. As soon as I brought it home, my mother smashed it to pieces. "What is this garbage? Don't you know it could be full of germs? If you bring another thing like this into my house, I'll throw you out along with it." After that, I stopped accepting gifts from anyone. But the image of Liam's wooden horse stayed with me for all these years, tucked away in my heart. Liam's voice pulled me out of my thoughts. "Rosalie," he said softly. "I've been watching you for a long time. On the outside, everything looked perfect, but your smile never reached your eyes. I always had this feeling that you weren't happy." He paused for a second, his gaze steady but filled with emotion. If I had any doubts, today cleared them up. "You're miserable with the Taylor family, aren't you?" He sighed, his voice calm but filled with a quiet intensity. "You did the right thing today. It's the first step, and it'll only get easier from here. Whatever you decide from now on, I'm behind you." I turned to face him, my voice soft. "Thank you." It was only then that I realized how close we were, standing so close that if I just leaned in a little more, our lips would touch. And for a moment, I was tempted. For so long, I had been nothing more than a spirit watching over him, unable to touch him. But now, here he was, right in front of me. All I had to do was lean in for one kiss. But before I could move, Liam took a step back, a bit awkwardly. I've got some work to take care of at the office. You should get some rest." I couldn't help but notice the tips of his ears had turned slightly red. Chapter 4, Taking Back What's Mine. Liam had gone to work, and for now, I stayed at his place. Running away from an arranged marriage wasn't something you could just sweep under the rug. After more than 2 decades of being controlled and shaped by the Taylor family, cutting ties wasn't going to be simple. And just as I expected, 3 days later, my mother called. Her voice came blaring through the phone, sharp and furious. "Rosalie, how long do you plan on fooling around like this? Get back here right now." I held the phone away from my ear and responded calmly. "Did you cancel the engagement with the Millers?" That sent her off like a firecracker. "Cancel? Are you out of your mind? You ungrateful brat. You ran off with another man on the day of your engagement. Do you have no shame? Nathan is still willing to marry you despite everything. You should be grateful. Now get back here and apologize to the Millers with me." I knew this was coming, but it didn't make it any less painful. "I'm not marrying Nathan," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm going to marry Liam." There was a brief, stunned silence on the other end before my mother's rage returned, fiercer than ever. "Have you completely lost it? That boy from the Jones family? What could he possibly offer us? His family is useless to us." I sighed, refusing to let her anger affect me. "Mom, am I really just a tool to you? Something to trade for power and money?" For a second, she hesitated, probably caught off guard by my words. But then, her tone sharpened, laced with venom. "What nonsense are you talking about? Has that boy from the Jones family been filling your head with this? Just wait, I'm coming to get you right now. You're going to come home, and you're going to kneel and think about what you've done." I let out a bitter laugh and hung up. I knew they'd find me eventually. I couldn't hide forever. But I wasn't planning to just run and hide. This time, things would be different. I wasn't going to let the Taylor family or the Millers get away with everything they'd done. As the eldest daughter of the Taylor family, I had a rightful claim to the family's business. In this life, I wasn't walking away empty-handed. I was going to take back what was mine. Chapter 5, Cooperation. That evening, when Liam came home, he found the table already set, dinner ready, and a bottle of wine open, waiting for him. I greeted him with a bright smile. "You're home! Come on, let's eat." He looked at me, clearly surprised, before sitting down and taking a bite. He nodded, impressed. "This is really good. Cheers," I said, raising my wine glass. We clinked glasses, and as the warmth of the wine spread through me, the air around us seemed to shift. I slipped off my jacket, revealing the silk slip dress I had on underneath. Liam's eyes widened, unable to hide his reaction. I thought of everything we'd been through, the loneliness he'd endured, the hope I'd lost, and I felt a sudden rush of courage. I took a sip of wine, and then leaned closer to him, my lips hovering just inches from his. Liam froze, his pupils dilating in shock as I kissed him, the taste of wine still fresh on my lips. It was like we were both caught in a whirlwind, lost in the moment. His fingers brushed the bare skin of my shoulder, sending sparks down my spine. Just as things were about to heat up, Liam suddenly pulled back, his voice low and rough. "Rosalie, do you know what you're doing?" I looked him straight in the eye and nodded. "Of course. I want you, Liam." His face flushed a deep red, but instead of pulling me closer, his hands trembled as he gently helped me slip my jacket back on. He avoided my gaze, his voice soft but firm. "I'd give you anything you want, but I can't do this." "Why not?" I asked, feeling a mix of frustration and confusion. "Because I care about you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Liam looked at me, eyes filled with sincerity. "I'm not here for a fling, Rosalie. I care about you too much for that. I respect you. I'd rather wait until you're ready to give me your heart completely. If that day never comes, I'll still be by your side, even if it's just as your friend." This fool. He didn't realize my heart had always been his. I knew he wouldn't believe me if I said it now, but that was okay. We had time. I wasn't in a hurry. What I needed now was his help, his trust. So I started telling him about my plan. As I laid everything out, I could see the surprise in his eyes, how he was processing every word. He was silent for a while, and I could sense a flicker of doubt behind his gaze. It hit me then he thought I was using him. I couldn't help but laugh to myself. "Liam, don't worry," I said, my tone serious. "When all of this is over, and I get what's rightfully mine, I'll make sure you get what you deserve. Not a single cent less." Chapter 6. Exposing the Truth. After that night, I returned to the Taylor household. Unsurprisingly, my homecoming wasn't exactly warm. Instead, I was met with punishment and scorn. I spent 2 hours on my knees before they decided to forgive me. Of course, this was just for show. The real punishment came later when my mother informed me that tomorrow, I'd be going to the Millers to apologize in person. That evening, I tried to smooth things over by cooking dinner. As I was setting the table, Ryan walked in. He gave me a once-over and then snorted. "I thought you ran away from the wedding. Why are you back?" I forced a smile. "Ryan, you're home. Come wash up, dinner's ready." He sneered. "Call me young master, don't forget yourself, Rosalie. Just because you have the Taylor name doesn't mean you're actually one of us. You're nothing more than the servant my parents had the misfortune of giving birth to. Don't start thinking you're really part of this family." I kept smiling, though it felt like my face might crack. "You're right, Ryan." For the next few days, I did exactly what they asked. I went to the Millers and apologized, groveling as expected. At home, I did all the chores without a word of complaint, cleaning, cooking, and taking care of everything. I was the perfect model of obedience. My parents, of course, kept up the facade of a happy family, only occasionally giving me orders reminding me how to be the perfect, submissive wife after I was married. But Ryan? He took every opportunity to humiliate me. He was still the spoiled brat he'd always been, quick to hit or insult me whenever he felt like it, throwing tantrums if I so much as looked at him the wrong way. And I played my part. I bowed my head, smiled when I had to, and kept quiet when I didn't. I catered to his every whim like a servant, humbler than any housemaid. But I wasn't just biding my time. I was gathering evidence. By the end of the week, I had what I needed. The living room had always been under surveillance. Late that night, I messaged Liam. It didn't take long. Within 10 minutes, his hacker had broken into the system, copied all the footage, and sent me the files. The next day, the internet exploded. A video titled "The Real Life of the Taylor Family's Daughter" shot straight to the top of the trending list. The footage? Straight from the Taylors' own living room cameras. The video began with me carefully carrying a bowl of soup to Ryan, only for him to knock it out of my hands with a single swipe. As I knelt to clean up the mess, he stood over me, laughing. Then came another clip. This time, I was on my knees, being scolded by my mother, who sat on the couch like a queen, pointing at me with a feather duster, telling me how to behave once I was married, as if I were some disobedient child. The clips kept coming me ironing clothes, sweeping floors, washing dishes, scrubbing tables, each one worse than the last. And then, as if timed perfectly, another story broke. I was being forced into an engagement with Nathan Miller, while side-by-side reports detailed Nathan's wild nights at clubs, spending thousands and leaving with a different woman every time. The internet went wild. Comments flooded in, the outrage growing by the minute. Miss Taylor? More like a maid. Can you believe this? The precious Miss Taylor is treated like dirt at home, and they expect her to marry that scumbag Nathan? The Taylor family is disgusting. How could Mrs. Taylor, a woman herself, treat her daughter like this? It's sickening. And they're forcing her to marry Nathan? That guy's trash. Why should she have to marry him? The Taylor family is garbage. I really feel for Rosalie. Chapter 7. A Plan. The public backlash was relentless, and under the weight of it all, the Taylor family's stock value was in freefall. Deals that had been in the pipeline evaporated overnight. My father was so stressed that angry red sores broke out around his mouth, and my mother? Well, she took her frustration out on me. You witch! Did you leak this? I knew you were up to no good. She screamed, her hand already raised to strike. I looked up at her, doing my best to appear hurt and confused. Mom, why would I do that? You and Dad are the only ones with access to the security footage. I couldn't have leaked it even if I wanted to. She faltered for a moment, her hand still hovering mid-air. Sensing my chance, I spoke quickly. Besides, I'm your daughter. Why would I want to destroy our family's reputation? I already regret running away from the engagement. I'd never do something so reckless again. Her anger dimmed, replaced by uncertainty. So, our security system was hacked? Just then, Ryan barged in, cursing under his breath about the mess I'd supposedly caused. He immediately headed over to check the house's surveillance system. After a few minutes, he turned back to us, his face serious. Yeah, the system was definitely hacked. My mother turned off the monitor and then shoved me toward the door. Go! Get on social media and tell everyone you did everything willingly. Say we never forced you to do any of it. I didn't move. Mom, it won't help. No one's going to believe me. Whether I say it was my choice or not, they'll just think you forced me to lie. Her face paled and she started pacing the room, clearly panicking. Ryan, of course, tried to help, but his ideas were as useless as ever. Watching them flounder, I finally decided to step in. I might have a solution. My mother whirled around, desperate for anything. Well, what is it? The real problem isn't just the housework or the videos. I began slowly. It's the public narrative. People think I'm being treated like a servant and forced into marrying Nathan. So, what if we change the story? If I come out and say that I chose to do all those things and that I want to marry Nathan, it could shift public opinion. My mother glared at me as though I'd said something stupid. And how's that different from what I just told you to do? You know damn well whether you're willing or not. Of course, the entire family knew I wasn't doing any of this willingly. That much was obvious. But none of them had ever cared. I let out a small bitter laugh, and then looked up at her. Mom, if I had the power of my own, if I had enough resources to stand on my own 2 feet, then everyone would believe I was doing all of this willingly. Because why would someone with power need to follow orders? She frowned, trying to piece together what I was saying. What are you getting at? I kept my voice calm and measured. If you and Dad sign an agreement giving me 5% of the Taylor family's shares, the narrative changes. I'd be seen as an heir, not a servant. People would look at those videos and think it's all a misunderstanding, or worse, that I staged it for attention. Ryan jumped up, livid. Are you insane? The Taylor fortune is mine. You're not getting a single cent. But my mother didn't react. She was thinking it over, her eyes narrowing as she processed what I'd said. "They'd think it's all a setup," she murmured. "Or that you're just playing the victim for sympathy." Then her gaze sharpened, and she fixed me with a suspicious look. "Rosalie, you're not trying to weasel your way into Ryan's inheritance, are you?" I kept my voice calm. "Of course not. You can include a clause that nullifies the agreement after I get married. That way, it's only temporary." She hesitated, still unsure, but I could see the gears turning in her head. I added, "If we don't act fast, and this blows up even more, the Millers might call off the wedding. And then we'll lose everything." In reality, I knew the Millers wouldn't back out. Nathan's reputation was so terrible that no respectable family would let their daughter marry him. But my mother wasn't thinking clearly, and the thought of losing the Millers' support sent her into a frenzy. Without another word, she rushed to call my father. Chapter 8, Signing the Agreement. A few hours later, my parents made their decision. They were going to sign the agreement. In their minds, the payoff was clear. The Miller family's wealth and connections were beyond anything they could ever hope for. Signing this risky little agreement was a small price to pay for the windfall they were expecting in return. But even then, they weren't about to take any chances. They insisted I spend the night with Nathan first to ensure there was no backing out once things were solidified. My father looked me over like I was a piece of merchandise, his tone detached and businesslike. "Rosalie, don't think we're being too harsh. Marrying Nathan is the best thing for all of us." I kept my head down, playing the role they expected. "I understand, Dad." That night, Nathan was out partying again, drowning himself in booze at one of his usual hotspots. Once they tracked down his location, my father had the driver take me there. When I got out of the car, the driver gave me a quick, stern warning. "Miss, we'll be keeping an eye on you. Make sure you find Mr. Miller." I couldn't help but laugh under my breath. I know. Of course, they were still afraid I might run. But that wasn't even an option right now. I wasn't done yet. Inside the club, I found Nathan lounging in a VIP booth, surrounded by his usual crowd. He had one arm wrapped around some girl in a skimpy dress, the two of them practically pouring drinks down each other's throats. As soon as he spotted me, his face lit up with a smug grin. He grabbed my arm and yanked me down beside him without missing a beat. Well, look who it is," he said, slurring his words just a little. "Come on, sweetheart, have a drink." Before I could react, he shoved a glass of whiskey into my hands and practically forced it to my lips. The alcohol burned my throat, and I coughed, tears stinging my eyes as his friends broke into laughter. Nathan pulled me closer like I was some kind of prize he'd just won. "This is my fiancé, folks," he announced, his voice dripping with a mixture of pride and condescension. "A real innocent little bunny, huh? What do you think? Quite the catch, right?" I swallowed my disgust, forcing a smile. There was no point in resisting now. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a hotel room key, and slipped it into his hand. Leaning in close, I whispered in his ear, "I'll be waiting for you upstairs." He blinked, clearly taken off guard, but then his eyes lit up with excitement, like a kid who'd just been promised a new toy. I sealed the deal with a soft kiss on his cheek, giving his chest a playful pat before standing up and walking away. As soon as I was out of sight, I rushed to the nearest bathroom and threw up, the taste of whiskey and the soreness of the situation still clinging to the back of my throat. Chapter 9, Unease. I hadn't left the bathroom when someone entered and locked the door. Seeing who it was, I was overjoyed and hugged him. "What are you doing here?" Liam instinctively caught me, his tone somber. "Your plan is too risky." I was worried. I was scared too, but his presence reassured me. Holding his hand tightly, I said seriously, "Don't worry. I'll be careful and won't put myself in danger." Liam's lips moved, but he just hugged me tighter. Time was short. After a few words, we had to go our separate ways. Before leaving, he grabbed me again. His eyes, filled with stars, were dazzling. "Rosalie, once you take this step, there's no turning back." I smiled. "Of course." His gaze deepened. "Then I'll hold on to you and never let go." Gathering my courage, I stood on tiptoe and kissed his lips. "I'd love that." His inner fire ignited, and he pulled me into a passionate kiss, swallowing my remaining words. Chapter 10, Cold Smile. After the kiss, we went our separate ways. I went to the reserved suite, dimmed the lights, and waited for Nathan. He arrived shortly. "Why is it so dark?" Nathan grumbled and reached for the light switch. I quickly intercepted him. "No, Nathan, the bright light makes me shy." Nathan laughed, pleased with my shyness. "I heard from your father that you're still a virgin. Is that true?" Disgusting. Suppressing my revulsion, I shyly picked up a glass of wine. "Yes, I have no experience. Can you be gentle?" "Don't worry, I'll be very gentle." Nathan, suspecting nothing, downed the wine. Things went smoother than I expected. Nathan, a womanizer, loved the thrill of conquest. He couldn't wait to get started. Feigning shyness, I urged him to take a shower. By the time he finished, the drug in the wine had taken effect, leaving him dazed with only one thought conquering the woman in bed. But the woman in bed had been replaced by someone hiding in the closet, wearing the same nightgown as me, with a similar build and voice. In his drugged state, Nathan couldn't tell the difference. After it was over, the woman left with her payment. I watched Nathan sleep soundly and finally let out a cold smile. Chapter 11, Disappearance. The next morning, Nathan woke up to find me gone. Of course, I left him a handwritten note and a bloodstain on the sheets. Back home, my father called Nathan to confirm everything before signing the agreement with a smile. My mother warned me. "Now that you have shares, remember, they become void once you marry. Don't covet what's not yours." "Yes, Mom." I obediently nodded and signed the share transfer agreement. With the agreement in hand, I immediately posted a clarification video online, as they had instructed. My parents finally relaxed, praising me as a good daughter. Just then, Nathan asked to meet, giving me an excuse to leave home. Of course, I didn't go to Nathan. I went to Liam's place. He frowned. "The negative comments about you online are increasing. Your clarification video had a big impact. It doesn't matter." After my past life's experiences, I no longer cared about public opinion. Besides, I planned to fan the flames even more. Now, the real counterattack began. I contacted various people including newspapers, company shareholders, gossip reporters, and Taylor family partners. Time was tight. I frantically gathered information and sought witnesses, working day and night. Liam could help with data collection, but most of the work was up to me. In my past life, I was his burden. In this life, I wanted to stand by his side with my own strength. The Sioux Group's financial situation was dire, but they had hidden it in their reports. In my past life, they survived thanks to the Miller family's investment after I married Nathan. This time, I would expose them before they could act. After 3 days and nights, I was ready. I checked my phone and saw dozens of missed calls from the Taylor family and Nathan. Just then, my phone rang again. I answered to hear my mother's angry voice. "You little brat, where are you? Nathan has been looking for you for 3 days. Are you trying to run away again? If you don't show up, I'll call the police." I smiled. "Mom, don't worry. You'll see me soon." Chapter 12, Press Conference. She did see me, but on a screen. I held a press conference to expose the Sioux Group's financial fraud. By the time the Taylor family realized, I was already in front of the cameras, presenting the Sioux Group's financial data. As a shareholder, I questioned the company, demanding they reveal the true financial reports, bond stubs, and more. I also filed a formal complaint against Chairman Su Dong for embezzlement and false investment. The stack of documents in my hand was evidence of their crimes, almost burying the Sioux Group. The press conference caused a huge uproar. Reporters bombarded me with questions. "Miss Taylor, why are you publicly accusing your family?" "Because the video content released online is true," I calmly replied. I suffered various abuses in the Taylor family. Although I'm their daughter, I had no rights as a wealthy daughter and was treated like a commodity to be sold to the Miller family for resources. Do such people deserve to be called my family? Another reporter asked. But you recently clarified that it was all an act, and you own 5% of Sue Corp's shares. I replied calmly. They forced me to clarify, and the 5% shares were compensation. The reporter continued. But if you bring down the Sue Group, your shares will be worthless. Have you thought about that? I smiled. I don't care about Sue Corp's money. I wanted the shares to have the legal right to question and hold them accountable. As we spoke, the hall doors burst open, and my father stormed in. You ungrateful wretch. He tried to rush at me but was stopped by reporters. Seeing this, he shouted. You tricked and coerced us into signing the agreement. I declare it void. Under the flashing lights, I smiled gracefully. Dad, once signed, the agreement is valid. Do you have evidence of coercion? Right, fearing another hack, my mother had turned off the surveillance during our conversation. My father was speechless. After a while, he desperately said, Don't forget, the agreement becomes void once you marry. What can you achieve in a few days? I replied firmly. I can stay unmarried for life. He had nothing left to say. I raised the documents. Now, Chairman, please respond to my questions. Chapter 13, Retribution. My father couldn't respond and had to face charges of embezzlement and false investment. The press conference ended with the police taking my father away, but the online discussion continued to rage. With the evidence I provided, the court quickly held a trial. My father was sentenced to 7 years in prison for false investment and embezzlement, and his assets were confiscated. The Sue Group's stock plummeted, and Liam and I cooperated to become the largest shareholders. As Liam's proxy, I took control of the Sue Group, starting my own business journey. One day, while busy with work, I received an unexpected call. It was Nathan. He spoke with a greasy tone. Rosalie, how are you? I frowned at the phone. What do you want? He chuckled. I miss you. That night, it was a bit hazy. How about we set another date? Even though the Taylor family is down, don't worry. My feelings for you haven't changed. You're still my fiancé. I coldly replied. The engagement is off. Don't contact me again. He shamelessly said. How can that be? I'm your man. I have to take responsibility. His arrogance made me laugh. You really think that night was with me? Let me tell you, it was a hired escort. If you liked her, I can give you her contact. But I'm not interested in you. Nathan was furious. You tricked me? Mr. Zhang, instead of ranting, you should get a health check. Your promiscuity could lead to diseases. I hung up. The woman I hired had HIV, whether he contracted it depended on his luck. In my past life, Nathan's promiscuity gave me diseases. This time I struck first, repaying him. The rest was up to fate. Chapter 14, Karma. I gradually established myself in the Sue Group, gaining the demeanor of a leader. 6 months later, at a shareholders' meeting, I won by a significant margin and was elected the new chairman of the Sue Group. Under my leadership, the Sue Group reformed and employees worked hard, united in their efforts. The company quickly improved. In this life, I walked a completely different path. My family, however, paid the price for their greed and cruelty. My mother tried to visit me at the company several times but was turned away by security. One day after work, I saw her outside the building. Due to my father's situation, they had exhausted their savings and were struggling. Seeing me, my mother smiled and approached. She looked haggard, her clothes worn, and her face had a suspicious red mark. Rosalie, you must be tired after a long day. I made dinner at home. Come eat with us. Your brother misses you. I looked at her like a stranger. Sorry, I have plans. She lowered her head, hesitating before speaking. Actually, I came to ask for your help. We're in a difficult situation. I coldly interrupted. What does that have to do with me? You said everything in the Taylor family had nothing to do with me. Even if you're struggling now, it doesn't concern me, right? She cried. You're my daughter. When you forced me to marry Nathan, I wasn't. I walked past her to a waiting car. Liam got out and opened the passenger door for me. In the car, we watched through the window. Soon, a burly figure approached and started beating my mother. You're useless. Couldn't even get money. My mother cried and apologized. I'm sorry. Ryan, give me another chance. I'll get money from your sister. They left, my mother's cries fading. Liam asked, Are you sad? I shook my head. Not at all. Chapter 15. The Truth. In my past life, standing on the rooftop, I had thought of jumping but held back. Then Ryan arrived, responding to my call for help. He wasn't there to save me but to ask for money. Hurry up and give me money. As much as you have. 10,000, 80,000, whatever. If you don't have it, call your husband. I held back tears, still concerned for him. Ryan, why do you need so much money? He was impatient. None of your business. Just give it to me. I took out my bank card, but when I heard him say, Just for a game. I'll win it back soon. You're gambling? I immediately withdrew the card. Ryan got angry. Give it to me. When I refused, he lunged at me. He was tall and strong, quickly snatching the card. Before leaving, he pushed me. You're so annoying. His push made me lose my balance, and I fell from the rooftop. Ryan panicked and ran home instead of gambling. My parents knew he had pushed me but chose to stay silent. They loved their only son, willing to let their daughter die unjustly to protect him. In this life, I wanted to see how my mother would continue to favor Ryan. I ignored their plight, only having my assistant update me on their situation. Ryan continued to gamble. My mother went to the casino to find him, only to be thrown out, injuring her back. She was hospitalized for a day before being forced out due to lack of money. Her only son was nowhere to be found. Once a wealthy lady, she now begged for food. I focused on my work. Having changed my fate, I cherished everything I had, including the people around me. A year later, I had accumulated enough capital. One day, Liam picked me up from work, heading to a hotel. On the rooftop, balloons floated, candles, roses, fireworks, kitsch but still heartwarming. Liam, in a tuxedo, handsome and elegant, approached with a large diamond ring. Rosalie, will you give me a title? His usually cool voice had a hint of pleading. Meeting his expectant gaze, I nodded. I no longer needed the 5% shares of Sue Corp to secure myself. Liam joyfully hugged me, burying his face in my neck, his voice trembling. I thought you'd never marry. I kissed his earlobe. Liam, you're worth more than that 5%. On the day we announced our engagement, Ryan died. Addicted to gambling, he owed more and more, eventually running away. I called the loan sharks, telling them his location. Ryan was caught at the docks, beaten until he was barely alive. In a desperate move, he jumped into the sea and drowned. He overestimated his swimming abilities. After his death, my mother broke down, crying for days. She turned to me. Knowing I wouldn't help, she sued me. I respected the court's decision. The court ruled I had to pay her $2,000 a month in support, starting when she turned 60. Until then. Leaving the court, I smiled at her. Until then, take care of yourself. Don't bother me. Her face twisted, tears streaming down. Years later, I heard she went missing. At the time, I was lying in Liam's arms, eating grapes he fed me. He asked, "Should we look for her?" Without hesitation, I shook my head. Those who never showed me true affection didn't deserve my pity.